Hello, everyone. I'm Olympia. Thank you for being here with me in this wonderful place called Lights Out Library. And I have a great story to tell you. And this one begins like this. Once upon a time, in the Empire of Persia, there was a king called Shahryar. His land extended as far east as India and China, and his name alone made lesser monarchs tremble. But even though no army or country could resist his power, Shahryar had failed to conquer the heart of his first wife. She had betrayed him with another man, and this had made him believe that all women would betray him in the end. This had made him cold and cruel, and so, to take his revenge on all women, he married a new one each night, only to have her executed the next morning, so she could never be unfaithful. For 3 years this lasted, and hundreds of young women lost their lives to the king's murderous madness. Noble parents in Persia lived in terror that their daughter would be chosen to become a queen for one night. The king's vizier found a new noble virgin each day. But eventually, few were left, and soon the turn of one of the most exquisite beauties in Persia would come, his own daughter, Scheherazade. She was not only beautiful, polite, and pleasant. She had studied philosophy, the sciences, and art. She had also collected 1,000 books of stories and histories about ancient kings, legends, and long-gone thinkers. And she was so passionate about knowledge that she knew them all by heart. She was witty and wise, and her father, the vizier, treasured her like no other person in the world. And so he trembled, because the turn of Scheherazade to marry Shahryar was coming. Before we continue our storytelling, I would like to take just a few seconds of your time to let you know that we have a Patreon page for those of you who wish to and can support this project, get more of it, and listen ad-free on your favorite podcast app. Patreon is a platform that allows you to contribute directly to our work financially. If you join, you will gain access to various new features. For example, you will have the option to listen to all episodes with or without background sounds and receive regular bonus episodes. We already offer 7 exclusive episodes to our patrons. The latest one is about the Palace of Versailles. In addition, you will have the capability to download all these audios to listen to them offline as well. Participate in selecting future topics. This one was chosen by our patrons. We also offer advance releases and updates on upcoming episodes. We hope to see you there soon so that we can continue developing Lights Out Library, which we enjoy so much. You will find a link in the description box and the first comment pinned under the video. As always, you do not need to watch the video to follow along. If you fall asleep and wish to resume the video later, or jump directly to a particular part of the story, timestamps are also listed in the description and pinned in the first comment, as well as links to different streaming options like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Music, which may be better suited for you. We ask that if you can, please subscribe to the channel and click on the like button. This helps us promote the channel and eliminate advertisements as much as YouTube allows us to. But before we begin, if you wish to, you may close your eyes and allow yourself to forget about any worries as we embark on this adventure together. Now, assume a comfortable position. Maybe move a little bit to settle. Take a long, deep, relaxing breath. And when you slowly exhale, feel your shoulders drop. Release the tension in your neck. Let your face soften and your jaw relax. Make sure your fingers are not clenched and that your legs are relaxed too. And allow the sound of my voice to guide you through this journey. And now it's time to continue our storytelling. Scheherazade's father was dismayed, knowing his daughter would soon have to marry the king. But to his surprise, she came to find him one day and volunteered to marry him of her own volition. This, in his view, could not mean anything else than a death sentence. Scheherazade, who loved life, had resolved to not only save herself, but all other women who would continue to die because of Shahryar's absurd revenge if nothing was done. And so she had elaborated a plan. As she had requested, she was married to the king, and that night she was taken to the king's chambers to spend her last night with him. But instead of crying and supplicating like her predecessors, she offered the king the story she had prepared for her younger sister. Shahryar accepted, and so she began telling a story so fascinating, exciting, and detailed that hours passed quickly as the king listened in awe. And then she stopped in the middle. The king asked her to finish the story, but Scheherazade said there was no time, as dawn was breaking. And this was right. The king looked outside, and the first rays of sun were about to appear. The night had passed. There was no way he would let her die without knowing the end of the story. For that reason, he decided to spare her life for one more day, so she could finish her story the following night. The following night, Scheherazade concluded her story and then began a second tale, even more exciting and suspenseful than the first one. Again, she stopped the tale halfway at dawn. Once more, the king spared her life to listen to the end of the second story. To everyone's surprise in the palace, the queen survived another day. A new life began for Shahryar. Each day he eagerly anticipated the conclusion of the previous night's story, and he kept Scheherazade alive as she made him live in a world of wonders, adventures, love, and heroism. This lasted for 1,001 nights, during which Scheherazade told 1,000 stories. During these 1,001 nights, Scheherazade and the king had 3 sons. But after 1,000 stories, the queen had none left to tell. She asked Shahryar if she could say goodbye to her 3 sons, as she believed he would certainly decide to have her executed now that she had run out of tales to entertain him. However, the king had fallen in love with her and could no longer imagine living without her presence. So he spared her life for good. The witty and wise Scheherazade had triumphed. Tonight, we're going to relive some of the stories Scheherazade told the king across these 1001 nights. Well-known stories like Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, Aladdin and the Magic Lamp, or Sinbad the Sailor, along with lesser-known tales. The stories are all folk tales and legends from the Arab and the Persian worlds that were compiled and rewritten over the centuries, often under the Arabic title Alf Laila wa Laila, which translates to 1001 Nights, including this framing story with Scheherazade, which I just told you. 1001 Nights is also known as Arabian Nights in English-speaking countries because it was the title of a translation published 300 years ago in the 18th century. I will tell you a little bit about the context. But now it is storytelling time, and we are going to continue with the story of Ali Baba. Let's dive into this one. Once upon a time, there was a merchant who had two sons, two brothers. The older brother was named Qasim, and the younger Ali Baba. Qasim was ambitious, but also envious and greedy, whereas Ali Baba was the opposite, simple, kind, and easy to get along with. This certainly made Ali Baba the happier of the two. He was satisfied with whatever life gave him. He never forgot to admire the beauty of the world and to feel grateful for anything he received. In contrast, Qasim was generally unsatisfied and could not stop thinking about what he didn't have. After their father's death, Qasim took possession of all the inheritance and went on to marry a rich wife, which made him well-to-do. Ali Baba married a poor woman out of love and settled into the trade of a woodcutter. Every day, Ali Baba went to the forest to cut and collect firewood. In the forest, he generally didn't meet anyone. However, one day, he heard voices and hid in a bush, because it was known that sometimes thieves and other outlaws traveled through the forest. A large group was approaching, a group of thieves indeed, but luckily they did not see him. From a distance, he watched them approach a rocky hill in the middle of the forest. One of them stood in front of a big rock at the hill's foot and said the words, "Open sesame," and a miracle happened. The rock magically moved to the other side, revealing the mouth of a cave. The 40 thieves entered the cave, and Ali Baba stayed petrified in his bush, afraid they could suddenly come out and see him if he moved. The rock returned to its place as soon as the last of the 40 thieves had entered the cave. So he waited, but not too long, because soon the 40 thieves came out of the cave with looks of satisfaction on their faces. Again, one of them stood near the entrance and said the words, "Close sesame," and by magic the big rock moved again and returned to its initial position, blocking the entrance of the cave so well that no one could have suspected there was something of interest there. After this, the 40 thieves left the place, and Ali Baba waited for a long time until the sound of their voices had completely vanished, until only the sounds of birds and wind in the tree leaves could be heard. Then he cautiously moved from his hiding place and came close to the rock. He could not control his curiosity, so he said the words he had overheard. "Open sesame." Exactly like before, the rock moved and revealed the entrance to the cave. Ali Baba entered and followed a dark corridor that soon opened to a large underground room. The poor woodcutter could not believe his eyes. Around him were the most sumptuous treasures he had ever seen, that most men had ever seen. Gold coins everywhere in chests and jars and bags, gems, gold, silver vessels and vases, precious silk carpets, extraordinary furniture. Ali Baba understood that this was the hideout of the 40 thieves, and that they had accumulated years of thefts here. He had seen them as they had come to check on their treasure or brought their latest booty to the cave. The poor woodcutter took a simple bag of gold coins and decided to return home with it. There was no harm in stealing from thieves, and this was so little in comparison to all that had been accumulated in the cave that no one would notice. But this single bag was more than enough to guarantee him and his wife a happy life. As he walked to the exit, he saw the rock had returned to its position in front of the entrance, so he said the words, "Open sesame," again. The cave opened and he could safely return home. When he told the story to his wife and showed her the coins, the two rejoiced. They would live on that gold for years, probably to the end of their lives, and this would make their days even happier. However, they needed to weigh the gold, so they asked their sister-in-law, Kasim's wife, if they could borrow her scales. Kasim and his wife liked to laugh at the poverty of Ali Baba and his wife behind their backs. They found them adorably humble and naive. So the sister-in-law was curious to know what kind of cheap grain or poor spices they had put their hands on. To satisfy her curiosity, she put a blob of soft wax in the scales. When Ali Baba returned them, she was shocked to find a gold coin that had remained stuck and immediately told her husband. Kasim was intensely curious about where this gold could have come from. It had not been stolen from him, and there was no way a simple woodcutter could earn such coins. So his brother had probably found a treasure somewhere. He needed to know where. He went to Ali Baba and pressured him so much that the poor man was forced to reveal the secret of the cave and how he had found this small bag of gold. Kasim could not believe his brother had been stupid enough to only take a small bag when he could have brought back much more. But he would not make the same mistake. He decided to go to the cave with a donkey, on which he would load as much treasure as possible. Following his brother's instructions, Kasim found a hill in the forest and the rock that blocked the cave's entrance. He said the words, "Open sesame," and the rock moved. The greedy man entered, saw the treasure as Ali Baba did before him, and could not help but champion joy and sing as he began to load his donkey. However, he was so excited that when he wanted to exit and found the mouth of the cave blocked by the rock, he could not remember the magic words. It was something about a plant or a cereal, but the words just did not come back to him. After hours of crying and rage and banging on the rock that he could not move, he sat in desperation and waited. He could never remember the words, "Open Sesame," and what had to happen, happened. After a day and a night spent alone in the cave, he was found there by the 40 thieves, who had once again returned to check on their treasure. They killed him and left his body inside the cave, just near the entrance, as a warning to everyone who might try to enter. Worried by his brother's absence after 3 days, Ali Baba went to the cave. Once again, he opened it with the magic words, "Open Sesame," and found his dead brother at the entrance where the thieves had left him. He brought the body home, but as he discussed this tragic event with his wife, they realized they were in great danger. If it became known in the city that Qasim had been murdered by thieves, the 40 thieves would probably hear of it and discover who he was. This would not only put his widow, but also Ali Baba and his wife at risk. As Qasim's brother, Ali Baba had inherited the business and the house, and the charge of everyone in the household where he now lived. The thieves had left the body of Qasim inside the cave, and it had disappeared, indicating that at least someone else knew their secret. So they would probably eliminate everyone close to Qasim to make sure their secrets stayed well kept. Qasim had to be buried under the pretense that he had died naturally, so there would be no suspicion on the family. The problem was that Qasim's body had been mutilated by the thieves, and no one would believe this to be a natural death. So Ali Baba went to find a girl named Morgiana, a servant from Qasim's household, who was known to be witty and resourceful. Maybe Morgiana could save the day. At least she could try. She agreed to help and organize the show. First, she went to an apothecary to purchase medicines and told him out loud that her master, Qasim, was gravely ill, so that the rumor would spread. Then she found an old tailor, Baba Mustafa, whom she paid. She blindfolded him and led him to Qasim's house so he wouldn't know which house he was in. Once arrived, she asked him to stitch Qasim's body as well as he could to make his death look natural. Baba Mustafa was an expert at his trade, and he did manage to repair the body well enough to make it look like the corpse of someone who had died from natural causes. Thanks to Morgiana's scheme, Qasim could be buried the following day without anyone suspecting anything. The family's honor, and also its safety, had been preserved, or so it seemed. As these events were unfolding in the city, the 40 thieves needed to find out who had entered the cave and removed Qasim's body. They had to silence this person forever. When they scattered in town for information about the recent burial of someone killed violently, they couldn't find any recent occurrence until one of them came across Baba Mustafa, the tailor, who mentioned that he had recently sewn a corpse to make it look presentable. The thieves immediately wanted to know in which house this had happened. But because Morgiana had taken precautions, as he had been blindfolded when he went to the house, the tailor didn't know. So he was blindfolded again and asked to retrace his steps and find the house. Unfortunately for Ali Baba's family, he could do it. It was still daylight and the thieves could not act yet. So the thief who was with the tailor marked the door of the house with a white cross in a circle. Thanks to this symbol, he would return at night with his 39 accomplices, and they would kill everyone in the house. Was everything lost? Not quite, because Morgiana, the astute servant, had seen the thief and the tailor, and how the door of the house had been marked. So when night fell, she quickly went out and marked all the houses in the neighborhood with the same symbol. When the 40 thieves arrived later that night, they couldn't identify the house since they were all marked. In a furious rage, the leader of the 40 thieves killed the thief that had marked the house and promised he would be back. So the next day, another thief went to find Baba Mustafa, blindfolded him, and asked him once again to retrace his steps. And so it was done. Except this time, the thief didn't mark the house with a symbol. Instead, he chipped a chunk out of the stone step at the entrance. But again, Morgiana was watching. She foiled the plan by making the same chip on all other doorsteps in the neighborhood. When the remaining 39 thieves returned at night, they were once again unable to locate the house. The second thief was killed for his failure, and the chief of the remaining 38 thieves decided to do things himself. The following day, he went to Baba Mustafa, retraced the steps with the old tailor blindfolded, but this time he memorized every detail he could of the exterior of the house, so that no one would be able to outdo him again. The thieves' leader supposed that the house was now aware that they were watched, since someone had reproduced the symbols and the chips. So he came up with a plan to infiltrate the house with his group. He pretended to be an oil merchant in need of Ali Baba's hospitality, bringing with him mules loaded with 38 large, sealed oil jars. One jar was filled with oil, which he opened to show Ali Baba the contents, and convinced him that he was a harmless merchant. But in the other 37 jars were the 37 other thieves. The plan was to wait for everyone to be asleep in the house at night. They would come out of the jars, and no one would be left alive. Again, Morgiana saved the day. While Ali Baba and his wife went to sleep, unaware of the great danger they were in, she opened the 37 sealed jars that had been unloaded from the mules. In each one she poured boiling oil, killing the 37 thieves in their sleep. When the leader, who had been offered a bedroom, went to wake his troops, he found all the jars opened, and in each one a dead thief. The 40 thieves were no more, and only their chief remained, consumed by his desire for revenge. The next morning, Morgiana told Ali Baba about the events of the night. and showed him the 37 dead thieves. They spent the day burying them discreetly. They had seen that the leader had disappeared and was not around them. But what could be feared about a now lonely man? Days, weeks, and soon a month passed, during which the last thief planned his revenge, cautiously and patiently. He changed the cut of his beard to be not recognized and established himself as a merchant. He befriended Ali Baba's son, who had also become a merchant, having taken charge of Qasim's business. One day, the opportunity he had been waiting for arrived. He was invited to dinner at Ali Baba's house by Ali Baba's son. As soon as he arrived, though, Morgiana recognized him and made her own plan to eliminate the last of the 40 thieves. She used to perform a dance with daggers to entertain the guests when there were dinners at the house, and this time she chose a particularly sharp blade. During her dance at night, she took the opportunity to come close to the thief as he was off guard, and at the moment he least expected it, she plunged the dagger into his heart. Ali Baba was first angry and mortified. Killing one of your guests was one of the worst possible crimes. But when Morgiana explained who she had killed and why, he was relieved, so happy with her service and sense of initiative that he offered his son to marry her. With the death of the last thief, all threats had disappeared, and Ali Baba would now be able to live carefree as he did before the day he had discovered the cave in the forest. Now that the 40 thieves were all dead, he was the only one left to know about the cave, the magic rock that blocked the entrance, the magic words, and the fabulous treasure the cave contained. I told you at the beginning that, apart from the very well-known tales, there were many lesser-known stories in Arabian Nights, in 1001 Nights. Before we discuss the historical origin of the work, here is another story, less famous than Ali Baba or Aladdin. It is called The Merchant and the Genie. It is an example of stories within a story. You will understand what it means. The story goes like this. Once upon a time, there was a very rich merchant who lived in a city, and he had a happy life. He had a loving family he was always happy to come back to when he returned from his journeys. He had everything he needed because his business prospered, and he liked his work, which made him travel to visit other kingdoms and make new contacts. Once, on such a travel, he crossed the desert to reach a far-off town, and on the way, he felt very tired. Luckily, he saw the green of an oasis nearby, in the middle of a sea of yellow sand. He went to the oasis. The place was pleasant. There was a pond of fresh water and palm trees offering a welcoming shade. He washed his face, drank some water, and sat down to rest at the foot of a palm tree. To pass time, he started throwing stones here and there, and finally got up and went to the pond again to wash his hands. But just then, he saw a large and ferocious genie running toward him. The genie looked angry and held a shining sword as he approached with a roar. "Merchant," he said, "you are going to be dead soon. I'll kill you as you dared to kill my son." The merchant did not understand. He had killed no one, but the genie explained that when he threw the stones, one of them hit his son's head, and he was killed instantly. The merchant said how sorry he was, that he meant no harm, and begged the genie to be merciful. But the genie was not in the mood to hear his pleas. He pulled the man to the ground and lifted his sword to strike him. In a breath, the merchant begged the genie to fulfill his last wish before killing him. Genies were compelled to grant that kind of wish, so he stopped just before striking and asked the merchant what his last wish would be. The merchant asked for the right to return to the city for the last time, so that before dying, he would be able to meet his family one last time, arrange some money for them, clear his debts, and give some more money to the poor, so that he could get a place in heaven after his death. The genie observed that this was a lot to ask for, and asked how long he would need for that. 1 year, the merchant said, and he swore he would be back to the oasis in exactly 12 months to be killed. Not 1 day before, and not 1 day after. The genie grew thoughtful but accepted, not before threatening the merchant that if he was not back in precisely 12 months, he would find him and make him die an even crueler death than the one he had set for him. The merchant bowed in agreement and returned to the city as fast as he could to tell his family what had happened and that his days were numbered. They all wept and decided to make the most of the year they had left together. As he promised, the merchant made a will, paid his debts, and gave food, clothes, and money to the poor. He spent as much time as possible with his family, and they were happy despite the dark cloud over their head that grew bigger and bigger as days, weeks, and months passed. Soon enough, the 12 months were over. He said goodbye to his wife and children, and with tears in his eyes, he proceeded towards the desert and the oasis, where he would meet his fate. When he reached the oasis, the genie had not arrived yet, so he sat down and began to wait. But as he was waiting, an old man approached and asked him what he was doing there, and if he was not afraid of the genie who lived in the oasis. The merchant replied that he already knew there was a genie, and that was the reason he was there. And he proceeded to tell him everything that had happened to him. The old man felt sad for him, but he was curious to see the genie. So he asked if he could wait with him, and the merchant said yes. The two started waiting, but before the genie arrived, a second old man approached and asked the same things as the first. They told him everything, and the second old man stayed with them to wait. Then came a third old man. The same things happened, so that when suddenly the genie appeared in a cloud of smoke, there were 4 waiting for him. The genie was even angrier than the year before. He had spent 12 months ruminating about his revenge and was eager to kill the merchant. He went to the poor man and threw him to the ground as the 3 old men were shaking with fear. As the genie was about to strike, the first of the old men found the strength to gather himself and asked the genie to hear his plea. The genie stopped and asked what he wanted. The old man said that he had a story to tell, and if the genie found the story more wonderful and exciting than the story of this poor merchant, the genie would have to spare 1/3 of the merchant's life. The genie was curious and liked stories, so he agreed to this, and he let go of the merchant for now. He said, "Tell your story, old man." And the old man told a story, a long and convoluted tale about how his wife became a hind, a female deer. This story lasted for more than an hour and captivated the 4 members of his audience. The story of the old man and the hind, was longer than the story of the merchant and the genie, and was so good that when the old man finished, the genie had to agree to spare 1/3 of the life the merchant had left. But as he was saying this, the second old man came forward and offered to tell his story against another 1/3 of the merchant's life. And he did. The tale of the old man and the dog was also very captivating. After him, the 3rd old man made the same offer. After hours and hours of storytelling in the oasis by old men within the story of the merchant, which itself was told by Scheherazade, to Shahryar within the story of 1001 Nights, the life of the merchant was spared, and the genie abandoned the project of avenging his son's death. These stories saved the merchant's life, and also saved Scheherazade's life for several consecutive nights. In a minute, I will tell you each of the 7 voyages of Sinbad the sailor. But before that, where do all these different tales come from? 1001 Nights was built over many centuries by various authors, translators, and scholars who compiled folk tales and traditions from several regions in the world, including the Middle East, Central Asia, India, and North Africa. The first compilations that can be considered ancestors of 1001 Nights included several overlapping stories. The first compilations were published during the Middle Ages in Arabic and Farsi. Published meant, at the time, copied manually. The framed story of Shahryar was taken from a pre-existing ancient Persian work called Hazar Afsana, 1,000 Tales, which itself was inspired by Indian and Persian tales. Then this was enriched by many more tales as the work traveled across the Islamic world, incorporating stories from Mesopotamia, Central Asia, Syria, and Egypt. For centuries, it was very well known and popular across the Islamic world. The tales were not just for children, they were for adults too, and they included erotic passages, or sometimes rather violent details that you would not expect to find in tales for children. Modern adaptations of these stories tend to tone down the murders or immoral actions of some characters because these adaptations are aimed at children. The original tales were sometimes for all audiences or only for teenagers and adults. Typically, we know 1001 Nights in the West under the guise of exotic fairy tales with magic genies and happy endings. But some of the stories were very different in style and tone. Some of them border on crime novellas. For example, there is one that starts with the discovery of a chest containing various body parts of a woman, and it is an investigation to find out who she was and why she was murdered. Others are more philosophical and can be read on different levels. Some stories are set in real historical locations, whereas others are in an unspecified fantasy world. The compilation includes poems, written in both prose and verse. As you can see, it is a much broader work than the Western perception that tends to see 1001 Nights as exotic fairy tales for children. The Western interest in it began in the early 18th century, which is already quite old. A French author who had traveled to the Levant, Syria, and Ottoman province at the time translated and published his own compilation in French. It was quickly translated into English with the title Arabian Nights. This compilation draws heavily on historical compilations in Arabic and Farsi. The majority of the tales are taken from them, but the French version also included two very popular stories from Syria that were not part of 1001 Nights until then. These are Ali Baba, that I told you about before, and arguably the most famous of them all nowadays, Aladdin and the Magic Lamp, with which we will conclude our night. Now, the story of Sinbad that we're going to relive is a part of 1001 Nights. It is said to take place during the Abbasid period in Mesopotamia, specifically in the 8th and 9th centuries AD. It forms a cycle with 7 voyages, and Sinbad the sailor is the main protagonist, the hero. This cycle appeared later than most of the tales in 1001 Nights, around the 18th century. It is not exactly known where it came from, but it is from the Middle East for sure. However, the different voyages may have much older roots in previous periods. Anyway, here's the story of Sinbad. Like other tales, there is a story within a story, and it begins like this. Once upon a time, there was a poor porter called Sinbad who bartered. Someone who carried goods around for other people. And this poor Sinbad lived in the city of Baghdad. One day he paused to rest on a bench outside the gate of a rich merchant's house. Sinbad complained about the injustice of the world. Why did he have to work all day and carry heavy loads just to survive as a poor man, while the rich lived in ease? The owner of the house, a merchant, also called Sinbad, heard him and sent a servant for the porter. The rich Sinbad told the poor Sinbad that he was not always rich. He became wealthy in the course of 7 wondrous voyages, and asked the poor Sinbad if he wanted to know what had happened. The porter accepted, and Sinbad began with his first voyage. Sinbad was born rich, and his father left him wealth, but he was a lazy and dissipated young man, so he lost all of his wealth. Left with nothing, he decided to go to sea to repair his fortune. Once at sea, he set ashore on what appeared to be an island. But when the sailors lit a fire on the island began to move and shake. In fact, it was not an island, but rather the back of a gigantic sleeping whale, on which trees had taken root, and the fire had awakened the animal. The whale dived into the depths, and Sinbad found himself floating in a chaos of trees, whirlpools, and other sailors trying to swim. Some could return to their ship, and the ship departed, leaving Sinbad alone in the middle of the sea, clinging to a floating tree. Days passed, and he thought his last hour would soon arrive. But he was washed ashore on another island, a real one this time, and this island was covered in a thick forest. Sinbad began to explore it and came across a man, a servant of the island's king. The servant was desperate because one of the king's mares that he had under his watch was about to drown. He had followed a magical horse that lived underwater and would not return to the land. Alone, the servant could not drag the mare to the shore. But with the help of Sinbad, they managed to save it, and so the servant invited Sinbad to return to the king's court with him. There he befriended the king and was able to retrieve the goods he had lost when his ship had sailed away without him, because the ship had docked at the same island. He offered his goods to the king as a sign of appreciation for inviting him to stay when he had nothing. In return, the king gave him sumptuous presents. Sinbad returned to Baghdad on his ship, where he sold the king's presents for a great profit. With this new fortune, he resumed a life of ease and pleasure. After a while, though, Sinbad grew restless with his life. He had tasted adventure, marveled at the vastness and richness of the world, and now he wanted more. So he set to sea again for his second voyage. Again, he was accidentally abandoned on an island. On the island lived rocs, giant birds of prey, enormous animals bigger than a house that preyed on elephants like a falcon preys on a mouse. The roc laid eggs taller than a man, and these birds were so big that a man was not even considered prey. Left with no way of leaving the island, Sinbad thought of a possibility. He waited for a roc to return to its nest and attached itself to its leg with the help of his turban. The next day, the roc took off, and Sinbad was transported back to the continent, a remote valley where the rocs fed. The floor of the valley was carpeted with diamonds that made it shine wonderfully. But the valley was deadly. It was populated by giant snakes, so big that they could swallow elephants. Rocs were attracted to the valley because they fed on these snakes and on the elephants. However, no man could survive more than a few minutes in this valley. So Sinbad abandoned his roc on a high point near the valley, and there he met with merchants who were in the business of collecting the diamonds. No one could go down and survive in this hell. So what they did was throw huge chunks of tender meat into the valley. The rocks liked this meat to feed their young, so they carried it back to their nests with diamonds stuck in the tender meat. The merchants waited for the rock to be gone again to recover the diamonds. This gave Sinbad an idea. He strapped one of the pieces of meat to his back and went down into the valley with a large empty sack. He began to collect diamonds, choosing the biggest and most beautiful ones, trying to avoid the serpents for a few minutes until a rock would spot him and the meat he carried on his back. Finally, a rock picked him up and carried him to its nest, with now a full sack of diamonds in his hand. Sinbad escaped the nest with his treasure and could return to Baghdad with a fortune in diamonds. And this is how his second voyage ended. On his third voyage, Sinbad and his companions were cast up on an island where they had to escape a terrifying, man-eating giant with a single eye. They blinded him with the iron spits the monster used to roast sailors, unfortunate enough to end up on his island, and they escaped by sea under the rocks thrown at them by the giant's mate. This was directly inspired by an episode of the Odyssey, in which Odysseus, Ulysses, lives a similar adventure. On his fourth voyage, he ended up shipwrecked as usual, on an island populated by naked savages. The savages were apparently peaceful, and they offered plants as food to shipwrecked crews, an herb that robbed them of their reason, after which they proceeded to fatten them because they were cannibals. Sinbad realized what was happening and escaped, thanks to a party of pepper gatherers that had made a stop on the island. They took him to their own island where he befriended the king and amazed him with the stories of his previous adventures. The king gave him a beautiful wife, and life went on for weeks, easy and pleasant, until Sinbad learned of a peculiar custom of this land. On the death of a spouse, the other was buried alive with the corpse of their marriage partner. Both were dressed in their finest clothes and most precious jewels, and thrown into a communal tomb, a cavern, with only a jug of water and a bit of bread for the survivor to last a few days. Unfortunately for Sinbad, soon after he had learned of this custom, his wife fell ill, and despite all his care, she died. Sinbad was quickly seized by the citizens and thrown into the pit with his dead wife. In this dark cave, Sinbad managed to survive for weeks. There were regularly new couples thrown into it, and generally, the surviving partner wanted to die quickly, so Sinbad would take their water and their bread. He also collected their magnificent jewels that had accumulated for generations. But how could he escape? He saw that wild animals sometimes visited the cavern, which meant there had to be an exit somewhere. And so he had the idea of following them. This is how he found a small and narrow passage at one end of the cavern that led him outside to a cliff with a beach below it. There he waited a few days more, living on his stock of bread and water, until a ship that passed by took him on board, and he could return to Baghdad wealthier than ever. But the call of adventure was stronger than the pleasurable life he had in the city. And once again, Sinbad set sail for the 5th voyage. On this voyage, while passing a desert island, his crew spotted a gigantic egg, which Sinbad recognized. This was a rock egg, one of those enormous birds of prey he had encountered on his previous journey to the Valley of the Diamonds. Foolishly, the crew disembarked to go see the egg, and they accidentally broke it and ended up having the chick inside as a meal. Sinbad ordered everyone to re-embark as fast as possible so that they would leave the island. But it was not fast enough. Already too late. The parent rock had returned as they were setting sail, and it soon caught up with the ship. In its fury, it attacked by dropping giant boulders on it. The ship sank, and all the sailors disappeared with it, except Sinbad, who survived by hanging onto a piece of wood. He was shipwrecked again. This time he ended up on an island where he was enslaved by a violent supernatural creature, the Old Man of the Sea, who sat on Sinbad's shoulders and twisted his legs around Sinbad's neck. The old man would not let go and forced the sailor to carry him wherever he wanted, day and night, until Sinbad would die and he would find someone else to ride. Eventually, Sinbad, who was losing his strength every day, managed to get rid of the Old Man of the Sea by making wine and offering him some. The old man became drunk and fell, and Sinbad killed him, after which he could return to Baghdad. On the 6th voyage, Sinbad's ship was dashed to pieces on tall cliffs, and his companions died of starvation until only he was left. On a raft that he managed to build, he discovered a river running out of a cavern beneath the cliffs, and on his raft he fell asleep out of exhaustion. When he woke up, he was in the faraway land of Ceylon, Sri Lanka, where he was introduced to the king and told him wonders about his adventures and the great Abbasid Caliph, Harun al-Rashid. After this, he was sent back to Baghdad with magnificent presents, including a cup carved from a single enormous ruby. For the 7th and last voyage, an aging Sinbad arrived on a desolate shore, floated down the nearby river to a great city, where he lived for some time, and found a wife, the daughter of the chief of the local merchants. But the inhabitants of this city had a peculiarity. Once a month, they transformed into birds for a day before returning to their human form. Sinbad had explored many lands and seas, but never the sky. So he asked several of them, when they were in their bird form, to carry him up high to the sky, to the uppermost reaches of the sky, where heavens began. Once flying there, He could hear the angels glorifying God, but the arrogance of a man trying to approach the heavens without invitation could not go unpunished. Balls of fire began to fall from heaven on the poor birdmen. Most died, and Sinbad narrowly escaped death, landing on the mountain top. There, he decided that this had been enough. He returned to the city, sold all his possessions, and went back to Baghdad with his wife, where at last he resolved to live quietly in the enjoyment of his wealth and to seek no more adventures. Peaceful years passed until one day he heard Sinbad, the poor porter, complaining about the injustice of the world near the door of his house. He invited him in and retold the porter all the adventures he had lived. This would not be complete without the story of Aladdin, probably the best known of all the stories associated with 1001 Nights, even though, as I told you earlier, this tale was not included before the 18th century. It is still an old Middle Eastern story, but it was added in the Western editions. It goes like this. Once upon a time, there was a poor young man, an adolescent called Aladdin, who was taken under the wing of a powerful sorcerer. The sorcerer pretended he wanted to set him up as a merchant, but his real motive was to persuade Aladdin to retrieve a powerful artifact for him, a wonderful oil lamp kept in a magic cave filled with traps. The sorcerer could not take the lamp himself because he was not agile enough, and so he planned to use Aladdin to take the risks for him. But he never told him what the lamp could do, out of fear that the young man would keep it for himself. One day, the two went to the cave, and the sorcerer gave Aladdin a ring, which he said would protect him, with instructions to go down a bit, where he would find the entrance of the cave. He was to take the lamp, an ordinary-looking oil lamp and nothing else, and bring it back to his protector. Aladdin accepted and descended into the cave. He found a cave where fabulous treasures were piled up, and on a pedestal, the oil lamp. He detected and avoided the traps that protected the lamp, and returned to the pit. The sorcerer asked him to give him the lamp first, after which he promised he would help Aladdin climb up to return to the surface. But this demand was strange, and Aladdin asked to keep the lamp until he reached the surface, because the sorcerer's behavior seemed ambiguous, to say the least, and he didn't trust him. They argued, and it escalated to the point that Aladdin refused to come out with the lamp. The sorcerer thought he would just wait for the young man to die in the pit, and now that the traps had been deactivated, he would send someone else to retrieve the precious lamp a few days later. And so, he abandoned Aladdin to his fate. The young man spent hours and hours in the cave, desperate, as he understood that no one would come for him, until he rubbed his hands in despair. When he rubbed the ring given by the sorcerer, a genie suddenly appeared. The ring was magical and could release a benevolent genie when it was rubbed, a genie that would serve the ring's bearer. The genie had powers, and Aladdin asked him to release him from the cave and to bring him back home. And so it was done. Aladdin returned to his mother, still in possession of the lamp that the sorcerer wanted so much. They were poor and had now lost their protector, so his mother had nothing to buy supper with, except for this lamp that she could sell. She began to clean the lamp, but as soon as she rubbed it, a cloud of smoke escaped the lamp. When the smoke dissipated, a second genie appeared. This genie was incredibly powerful and had been bound to the lamp since immemorial times. He told him that he had to serve the person holding the lamp, and this is how Aladdin became the owner of one of the most precious magical artifacts in the world, one that could accomplish all his wishes. From this moment on, his life changed completely. With the aid of the genie of the lamp, Aladdin became rich and powerful. He even married the Sultan's young and charming daughter. And following their marriage, the genie of the lamp built for him and his bride a wonderful palace, even more magnificent than the Sultan's. But such a twist of fate and the rise of a poor young boy did not go unnoticed. The sorcerer heard of Aladdin's good fortune and understood that it could only come from the lamp that he wanted for himself. Somehow Aladdin had escaped the cave and discovered the power of the lamp. So the sorcerer waited for Aladdin to be out of his palace and asked to be received by his wife, the princess, posing as a merchant who exchanged old lamps for new ones. He managed to trick her because she didn't know the secrets of the lamp. She was happy to offer the old lamp that her husband had for a new one, more beautiful, and she also thought that the merchant's business was not really to his advantage. Of course, as soon as he held the lamp, the sorcerer became the new master of the genie, and he ordered the genie to take the palace with all it contained and transport it to where he lived, while obviously keeping the lamp that would now allow him to satisfy all his wishes. When Aladdin realized everything had gone, the palace, but more importantly the lamp and the genie, he was devastated. What he had left was only his wife, the princess, and the genie of the ring, far less powerful than the genie of the lamp. But he summoned the genie of the ring to see what could be done. The genie could not undo any of the magic of the genie of the lamp, but he could still transport them to their former palace. There, Aladdin and the princess managed to outwit the guards and the sorcerer and recover the lamp. Aladdin then ordered the genie to return the palace to its proper place, allowing them to resume their happy life, which culminated when Aladdin succeeded to the throne of his father-in-law, the Sultan. He had now ascended from the lowest to the highest position, thanks to his two genies, his wife, and his own determination. We have now reached the end of our stories for tonight, and I hope you liked this journey. You can now close your eyes and let go, or pick another story from my library. And until we meet again, good night. Sleep well.